Don't panic, just crashing at a friend's, she wrote, like a joke that needed applause. I stared at the phone until my thumb left a dent in the glass. 6 missed calls later, the motel's sign had 3 syllables and a grin. I drove past slow enough to count curtain seams. People ask why I didn't roar. They ask because in movies the wronged husband lights the world on fire. I am a contractor. I measure things. I know the pressure a stud can take before it splinters. I wanted the splinter to go somewhere useful. Breakfast at her parents' Tudor was a demonstration in being tidy about grief. Her mother set down a plate that could have been a prop in a museum and smiled like a woman practicing a kindness. Her father kept his hands folded like a judge keeping a gavel. They already knew. News travels fast on cul-de-sacs and faster in living rooms that run on the engine of appearances. I kept my hands where they belonged. I kept my voice even because the louder I was, the less people took me seriously. Maya, my wife, wore a neat PR smile like a uniform. Trevor Pike, the lover, wore an even cleaner one. He managed properties. He managed his teeth. He managed a leased car with more shine than sense. He was used to polishing facades. He was the kind of man who could explain away a late text as a work thing and make it sound harmless. While you're here, hit the hype button. Don't forget to subscribe and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? Work keeps you honest in ways conversation doesn't. I spent the morning stripping an antique banister back to the quarter-sawn wood and thinking about the way secrets settle in grain. The banister didn't talk. The banister only gave answers if you asked the right way. You plane away the soft stuff, and what remains is stubborn and real. That afternoon, I returned Maya's blazer to her office reception, where the gossip is a free service. I slid a plain card into the sleeve. "Hope you're safe," it said in a polite hand my mother would approve. Tucked inside was a white hotel receipt from a night before, time and room number printed. No accusation, just paper. I watched the receptionist read it and watched the way her eyes lifted toward the glass elevator where staff pass like fish in a bowl. Trevor found me in the parking lot later. He came high on confidence, which is a smell you can read from 10 feet. "We need to talk," he said. He sounded like he was reading from a script he'd been practicing. I listened. He had that practiced calm of men who work in buildings and think rules are an architecture you can climb. We shoved words until one of us shoved harder, and the rest is blunt. He dropped his key fob when he stumbled back. I bent, picked it up, and handed it back. Slow, deliberate, hands steady. The way you hand back a tool to someone you intend to cut with later. I don't shout in public. I organize the world so people can witness their own unraveling. I told a story at a free porch demo the next week with an accent of worry. "Friend Motel," I said loud enough for the neighborhood to hear, "is not a place I'd want her to stay." People nodded. People repeated it. Lena Voss, Maya's friend and catalog of brittle loyalties, leaned forward with the satisfaction of someone currently collecting receipts. At the off-season boardwalk, under the rust of a coaster that creaks like a throat, I followed Trevor between service stairs until the light from a security bulb painted him in the color of guilt. He darted, I kept pace, and teens with cheap phones filmed our passing like it was footage from a minor celebrity sighting. I let them. Let the footage circulate. Let an audience build. I arranged the next humiliation at the charity 10K finish, where Trevor came for points and applause. I painted a message on his car hood with washable paint that said nothing more than a hint. Friend. The crowd laughed. Someone posted it, and the image spread in a way a courtroom can't buy. Trevor scraped the paint off with shaking hands. His face, that engineered smile, twitched like a mask slipping. The tablet in our kitchen had a new profile. Guest, a game account, a streaming profile with a neon avatar that could be mistaken for a motel sign. Small things matter. A lease notification I wasn't on flashed on the shared calendar. Lease walkthrough, Unit 4C, Tuesday, 10 a.m. My name was not part of it. I started watching Galleria Towers like a man staking the movement of termites. Trevor knew the staff. He moved through the lobby with the kind of ease men develop when they want to be seen as reliable. Lena, brittle and scared, slipped and told me what I needed. Graham, Maya's boss, had suggested a narrative that made me the loose thread. Make him look unstable, Graham had said, and the company will fold the story into a tidy PR exit. They wanted me to do something visible so they could do something neat. They had tried to engineer the moment. What they didn't know was that you cannot force stubborn people to behave predictably if you learn how the stage is set. I learned the stage. I picked the abandoned mall parking deck because it had cameras that mostly worked and teenagers who liked an audience. I called Trevor and said I'd return a box of Maya's things. He met me at dusk with the new lease printed as proof that he was an upstanding man and I was a mistake in the margins. The scuffle started like two men argue for the benefit of wind. Trevor's temper tipped him into a reach. A security guard's flashlight found us, and teenagers' phones recorded the spill into a stairwell. I took a slap, tasted metal from a bitten cheek, and smiled like a man who had time. Trevor tried to make it into violence, tried to frame me as dangerous. He came off like a man pretending to be furious for the sake of optics. The video did what videos do. It froze him mid-hysteric, and me holding a calm. I keep lists. That's another thing people don't know about husbands like me. We keep lists because we have to remember what normal looks like before we unmake it. On a sheet of ripped drywall paper, I wrote names, dates, small facts, motel receipt, charity run, video link, Lena's late-night call, lease 4C. I wrote them like a man cataloging tools before a job, because that's what this was, a job, and I am tradesman of consequence. The fun park chase was flatter on first read. I had to wait for a Tuesday when the park's contractor was doing maintenance. The place smelled of oil and old cotton candy, and the absence of laughter sounded like a vacuum. Trevor moves fast when he thinks no one is watching, but he forgets teenagers with cheap phones are always watching now. I followed him under the coaster and between the service ladders, my boots thudding in rhythm. When he realized he was being followed, he tried to run. He was surprised and clumsy, in a way that embarrassed him more than any public lecture could. At the charity 10K, I timed the paintwork, to the moment people shifted cameras from runners to cars parked along the course. I had a friend in the PTA who knew how these things were set up, and she told me where people looked during the announcement. I laid out the letters "Friend" on his hood in block script that would photograph like a headline. When he arrived, I was standing at the curb, hands in the pockets of a man who'd given up on drama, face a map of patient things. He scraped the paint and someone cheered, and the image became a small public joke that never forgets. Using the reception desk to seed the reception was old school, and as ridiculous as an old tactic can be. The receptionist didn't need convincing to pass the receipt to a manager who passed it to the HR folder and then to the gossip chain. A paper trail is a boring thing until someone reads it in a context where everything else smells like an explanation. I did not lie. I did not cheat. I simply offered evidence in a package that people would assume meant more than it did. Finding lease 4C on the shared calendar was a trusting moment in a relationship that had become a ledger of small betrayals. The calendar is a stupid place to hide things because it assumes only two people can read it. We shared passwords like couples do. I found it and felt my stomach tighten not with shock, but with the satisfaction of a craftsman who has found a flaw in a wall and plans his extraction. On the Galleria lobby day, I made sure to be late at the coffee kiosk, where men like Trevor order a double espresso to show they can be awake for anything. He came by, smiling like he owned access to air. He tried to say something clever about timing, and I smiled back with the smile of a man who had already put a leash on the crowd. Later, in the parking lot, as people filed into the evening, I invited him to meet me at the mall so we could clear up the misunderstandings. He came with proof, neatly folded, and a posture that expected applause. He got an audience instead. Graham's office was its own ecosystem. He sits behind a desk that has been buffed so many times, the wood shines like a face that refuses to age. He offered me coffee like an offering between men who make decisions about other people's pain. "We can do this the sensible way," he said. He used words like sensible, the way other people use prayers. I told him that sensible had to include honesty, and he misread that for anger and called security. It was a strange thing to watch a corporate creature try to stage an adult when the audience was already here. Lena's confession was not dramatic. She didn't fall to her knees or melt into cinematic remorse. She admitted, in a voice that sounded like someone describing a mortgage, that she'd fed lines and planted scenes. People in PR stage things for the way a director stages a set. Lighting, camera angles, the right cuff peeking out of a sleeve at the right moment. Saying that out loud in a room full of clients and juniors was like cutting oxygen off from a small animal. The room didn't know where to look for air. The slap was an act of calculation. I had rehearsed it in my head like a line, not to injure, but to rearrange an equation. He hit the metal of his hood, and the dent was a punctuation mark. People gasped, and the angle of his posture turned from aggressive to pathetic. In that motion, he became a subject of ridicule instead of a man with a future. His car, his polished life, had been part of his insurance policy against shame. That dent mattered more to him than his moral compass ever had. After that, things happened like dominoes if you set them on edge with patience. Maya's curated world was brittle as froth. Clients called in whispers. The firm issued a memo about internal conduct that read like a cleanup. Her parents' neighbors had already seen the videos and were passing the word like a hymn written in gossip. Trevor's leasing references evaporated. He started showing up late to meetings, looking at his phone the way a ship looks at the horizon when it knows it's sinking. I expected threats and a lawyer to be the reasonable responses. Instead, I was met with silence and small withdrawals, clients who scheduled calls and then did not call, friends who texted once and then not at all. The firm put out a statement about internal reviews, which is corporate for, "We are protecting ourselves before our faces are mud." Maya's calendar filled with counseling appointments she never kept. Trevor started making mistakes like leaving keys in the freezer and missing lease renewals. On a thunder evening, I stood at the top of Galleria parking deck and listened to the city hum. Rain came in hard lines, and lightning stitched the sky like a seam. It makes you honest, weather like that. Maya came up the stair, rain on her coat and fear in the tilt of her shoulders. She tried to speak, and the words were pried from her by the sound of a car revving below. Trevor, frantic. He came barreling up in that leased car of his, tires throwing water and neon. He drove like someone hoping speed will erase shame. The deck is narrow. His tires found what little grip the wet paint could offer, and the car fishtailed, stopped sideways. I walked to him, rain washing the salt of the city off my jacket. "Friend," I said, because the irony pleased me and because the word tasted like a key. I reached in, unbuckled, and took the keys. It was the simplest thing in the world and the most devastating. He reached for them, and I put my hand over his and then let them slip, small as a coin, into a storm grate. The sound it made as it fell is one I'll hear for a long time. Maya screamed his name. He screamed mine back until his voice cracked into nothing. In the elevator, later, the office called our attention to conduct and consequence. There would be meetings and lawyers and statements that smell like antiseptic. None of those things would make the videos go away. I walked away. Not because I am a saint. Not because the moral ledger balanced. I walked away because my point was made. The revenge I had planned wasn't about breaking bones. It was about showing the world the machinery they thought they could operate in secret. I took keys and left them to be lost, not because I wanted property damaged, but because a man who manages appearances cannot be without control over those appearances, and losing that control is its own slow punishment. People asked if I slept. I slept like a man who has finished a climb and is waiting to see if anything else moves. The city moved on in its soft mercies and hard indifferences. Maya called once, voice a scrape, asking for a conversation in public. I said no. I had what I wanted, and what I wanted was not to be part of the tidy ending she wanted to print. This is not a story about a noble ascent. This is the story of a man who learned how stages work and took his cue. I became the villain because villainy can be useful when the law is neat and the public is willing. I did not cook up accounts of fraud or write lies. I used receipts, calendars, public spaces, and the one weapon people forget when they think they own others: witness. On the way home, I passed the motel again. Friend blinked in tired rhythm. A house can be 1,000 small betrayals. A man can exact revenge with a spat of paint, a key in a grate, an open-handed slap in front of a crowd, and watch as a life curated from edges and bright things peels away until the center is plain. I thought about studs and splinters and the strange satisfaction of patience. I dropped my phone into the console and heard it thunk. The screen lit up with a final message from Maya. Please, don't tell my parents. It was the oldest trick in the book, the one where people try to cut the audience off before the show starts. Too late, I thought. They had already seen. They had already watched. The lights had been turned on. I put the truck in gear and drove away. The rain made everything sharp. I kept my hands on the wheel because that's what you do when you're finishing a job. The rest of the city was a smear of tired luminescence, and the motel's F burned out completely in the mirror.